Hi, Sean Kosofsky here, the Nonprofit Fixer, and I'm just doing a video for you now about the differences between being an executive director and being a CEO. This is a very frequent conversation in the nonprofit sector. Do we call our chief executive officer a CEO? Do we call them an executive director? Do we call them managing director? There's lots of different reasons to consider these choices. And this can be a very charged and sometimes polarizing conversation for some people, and we'll talk about that for a second. Essentially, when nonprofit organizations are incorporated in a state as a corporation, a not-for-profit corporation, at that time, when the newly formed nonprofit corporation creates a set of articles of incorporation and set of bylaws, this is around the time you decide whether or not you're going to have an executive director or whether you're going to have a CEO. Technically, they're basically the same thing, but they have different connotations. Your bylaws should spell out what you're doing, though. Some people really like the term executive director because it's familiar. People know exactly what it means. It has a strong connotation for running an organization. There are corporations now that are using executive director in certain parts of the business, including social and environmental areas or different business units that are self-contained within the company. But essentially, 95% of the time, when you hear the term executive director, people will imply or believe it is a nonprofit CEO. So that is traditional. Now, some folks choose CEO, and there's reasons for this. It could be because the board or the executive director, when negotiating their salary and title, prefer CEO. Maybe they came from a CEO role, or maybe it's their life dream to be a CEO. Either way, for all intents and purposes, CEO and executive director are basically the same, but they just have these different connotations. If a lot of your funders and donors are big wigs, big deals, corporations, they might be a little bit more familiar with and a little bit more warm to the understanding of what a CEO is, although all of them know what an executive director is. Sometimes the board or the ED want to communicate that they are also on par and a peer with other CEOs in different spaces, fintech, corporations, conferences, and they might choose to call their executive director a CEO. Just know that when you choose executive director versus CEO, you might attract different people when you do a job posting or a search. And it might scare some people to be called CEO, and it might diminish some people to be called CEO. They might have an aversion. That's why this can be a really polarizing conversation. It also might determine what you end up having to pay. If someone thinks they're going to be a CEO instead of an executive director, they think they're probably going to get a little bit more money. I would not be surprised if people believe CEOs are paid more and therefore try to negotiate more. So it's just a matter of internal decisions in your organization. Another thing to consider is that some organizations set up their bylaws so that the CEO is also called the president and CEO. This is important. An executive director generally does not serve on the board. They work for the board. The board exists, there's a president or chair of the board, period. And then the executive director is hired by the board to do the day-to-day running of the organization, and the board does the governing. However, sometimes people will put into their bylaws, we want this person to be called CEO, and we want them to be the president and CEO. That means they are not only the CEO, but they also have a spot on the board, and they are the president of the board. This is a very powerful position. A very small minority of nonprofits do this. Probably a ballpark around 20% have a president and CEO model in their nonprofit. I believe, although I can't prove this, I believe most president and CEO roles are not voting. So when the president and CEO is in a board meeting, they generally abstain from voting because there could be a little bit of a conflict of interest, and it could be like stacking the deck because they're the one implementing all the work. But that CEO might have to break ties or might have to be the final word on some things. check in with your own organization, your own lawyer, and your own bylaws and your state to decide whether the president and CEO is allowed to vote or whether you want them voting. You want to try to drive toward consensus in most board decisions anyway, but definitely look into that. Finally, when you're trying to decide the CEO versus executive director title choice for your organization, it is sort of hard to change it later. So make sure you get it done right when you do the bylaws. And ultimately, I think your stakeholders, if you're going to make a change, they should be consulted. Stakeholders could be major donors, foundations, government funders, things like that. But in general, just to clarify, your state determines how you organize the responsibilities and titles in these roles. I believe most states allow you to choose for yourself whether the president and CEO or executive director is the person running the organization, but you will have some stipulations, and definitely talk to in-state counsel about the right choice for you. Mostly, I believe the term CEO is used when someone wants to be called CEO or they came from a